Hey folks, a quick content warning for sensitive listeners. In this episode, we briefly discuss suicide between minutes 23 and 25. And now, onto the show.
It's your job. I give you money, you give me ideas.
And you never say thank you.
That's what the money is for.
Welcome to Bottle Episodes, a podcast where we discuss very special episodes of TV shows that focus their action on a single primary location. I'm CJ.
And I'm Courtney.
And today we are talking about Mad Men, the prestige drama that aired on AMC from 2007 to 2015. How you doing, Courtney?
I'm doing pretty good, all things considered.
All things considered, that is a big conditional to append to your sentence. The whole world is falling apart.
The world is melting.
This is our first episode where we're attempting a remote setup.
Right.
And we got there in the end.
We made it.
My friend Justin sent me an article by Michael Osiello.
Oh, yeah.
It's a name that I've read but never said, so I assume it's Michael Osiello.
I love that dude.
Yeah, he's great. He's a television journalist of some repute, and he put together a list of the best bottle episodes to enjoy now that the entire world is going through our own real life bottle episodes. We're all on lockdown.
We're all on lockdown. We're all trapped. There's nowhere to go.
Yeah. He named some pretty classic ones. Friends, the one where no one's ready. Fly from Breaking Bad. So you and I are most likely going to burn through that list one way or another.
Yes.
We certainly have the time now.
We can do it. We can definitely do it. And CJ, what bottle are you currently sitting in right now?
I'm sitting in my closet.
Okay, cool. So am I.
Great. And I'm glad to see that I'm in good company.
You are. And I'm happy to say that my closet studio that CJ, you were so generous to help me put up some time ago is now like really, really getting its money's worth. And I'm so excited that we get to be in our tiny closets together.
All right. Well, let's clink our quarantinis together and get to it. We're talking about The Suitcase, the season 4 episode of Mad Men that aired on September 5th, 2010. And the bottle of the week is The Offices of Sterling Cooper Draper Price.
Yes.
Before we get into the episode in earnest, do you have any thoughts on just Mad Men, the show in general?
I think for a lot of people around our age, this show kind of shaped a perspective on what it meant to be cool, a perspective on what it meant to be a hardworking person who kind of went up, worked their way up. And this is all very surface level reading. I know that a lot of my dresses that I chose to wear to work resembled that of Joan.
So you're saying that around that time when it was airing, you were just getting into the workforce.
Yep.
Same as me. So maybe you and I saw things, especially through the lens of Peggy,
right?
Through the lens of Joan,
yes.
As opposed to maybe like the old guard, the titular Mad Men,
exactly,
of the show.
Yeah,
we weren't dads going through a midlife crisis and wondering who are we and what does it mean. Now that you frame it in that way, the show did teach me a lot about workplace politics, and even like what a merger was and how it affected the people that it affected.
Exactly.
They did a really good job of dramatizing that.
They did. And I will say that the arc of this particular episode focuses on creativity on demand, which is something that I feel like I have been thinking a lot about in my own work life right now. And what it means to be able to work under a very specific kind of pressure, and what it means to have a mentor and then have it out with that mentor, like all these sorts of really interesting intersections in the workplace. And I think revisiting this particular episode was a revelation for me. It's a phenomenal hour of television.
Agree. I think it maybe my favorite episode of Mad Men, if not top 3. I know I'm not alone in that in terms of the Mad Men fandom. This is a huge favorite among many a fan.
Exactly.
Where does it fall for you?
With very good reason. I love this episode. I feel like it is in my top 3, if not my top 2. I'm just gobsmacked that this episode came in the 4th season. I don't know, it just looms so large for me that I always think it came earlier than it did. But
yeah.
where it lives right now in the series, it's perfectly placed. It is, I feel, a definite turning point for our two main characters and for what the show goes on to become.
True. And I was going to bring up this observation later, but now that you bring it up in terms of episode order and where we are in the series, the Suitcase is the exact midpoint of the series. It's episode 46 out of 92. And just seeing it as the fulcrum of this entire 7-year-long story, it makes it all the more powerful.
That's incredible.
This really is a intersection in the relationship between Don and Peggy, as well as their own individual arcs. So it's a big one.
Yeah, phenomenal. I mean, I know that Matt Weiner is all about attention to detail, but that particular detail is amazing. My hat is off to him.
Yeah, I wonder if he had always planned it to be a 7-season show.
Yeah.
I would assume that he would, or I assume that that was his ideal.
From my perspective, I would not, I would not put it past him, and B, I think it's really interesting that he is the person with the sole credit. The sole writing credit on this episode. It purely feels like he was saying, I am guiding this show, I am moving it in this particular direction, and I feel like it has to fall. Not that he doesn't trust his writing crew, his writing team, but he just wanted to make sure that the ship was guided in a very specific way. And so he was the one who literally shaped and molded this episode.
Agree. Speaking of story, let me fire off a really quick synopsis to help orient you and me in this discussion.
Do it.
May 25th, 1965, the day of the much-anticipated boxing match, Muhammad Ali versus Sonny Liston. At Sterling Cooper Draper Price, Don and Peggy work on an ad campaign for Samsonite. Don's unimpressed with Peggy's idea and tells her to start over, frustrating our scrappy copywriter. Meanwhile, Don avoids phone calls from California, knowing that they're about his good friend, Anna Draper, who's in the final days of her battle with cancer. It's cancer, right?
It is cancer, yeah.
I didn't double check that when I wrote this. Okay, it's cancer.
It's cancer.
As Don grapples with death, Peggy contemplates life. It's her 26th birthday. But while the rest of the SCDP crew heads off to enjoy the Ali Liston fight, Don makes Peggy stay at work late to figure out the Samsonite campaign once and for all. As the two pull an all-nighter, the gloves come off, resentments are shared, and secrets are bared.
On the surface, as you're watching this episode, you're like, okay, there's a lot of interesting stuff that is happening here. And then you start to slowly realize this is the most time we've seen Don and Peggy together, like just anchoring the episode together.
True. Yes. I guess ever, right?
Ever. Yeah, ever. I mean, like, we've seen them interact. We've seen them have explosive interactions. We've seen them have really important, just forget about your past kind of conversations. Mm-hmm. But this is the first time we've seen them really, really bond over a long amount of time. And then added to it, they're in a fight in the beginning of it, and by the end, they have come to a place of recognition where they just see each other really clearly.
Both of them are contemplating, where they are in their own lives. And this is how I read it. Both of them feel very, isolated and alone. And by the end of it, they sort of realize that they do have each other, which might come off as cloying, as sentimental on any other show. In this show, I feel like it's extremely earned and really moving and genuinely powerful, because one of the things that really fascinates me about Mad Men in general is that it is a show about transactional and conditional relationships. I love that these people, even though they spend a good amount of time with each other, they spend at least 5 days out of the week with each other. They could forget about each other. They could cut a bitch if it came to it.
Absolutely.
They're not necessarily the most important people in each other's lives. Do you know what I mean?
Oh, yeah. No, they are very clear on that.
So I think that this is the episode where it really hits both Don and Peggy at the same time, that they really do care about each other and care for each other. And again, a dynamic like that is almost a given on any other sitcom or even workplace drama, but
Right.
for a very particular drama such as this one, that is not a given at all. I like that
No,
the
it
characters
is
don't really
not.
care about each other.
They don't. They really don't. Like, they have done some terrible things to each other. But what's interesting to me is that this caring for each other between Don and Peggy not only stems from the fact that they are just two people who very much recognize each other, they very much see each other and have kind of a weird backstory that meshes. But they're also two people who really are coming out of this from the work. It is the work that really provides the basis of their attachment to each other. And even then, eventually, that attachment grows so deep that they can go their separate ways as the series continues. But it is the work, it is that sort of creative, that sort of well of creativity that really draws them together and moves them forward as friends, you know, platonic ideals.
Let me ask you this. What do you think drives Peggy in terms of the work? Do you think that she wants to be ambitious and she's building a career for herself? Or do you think she just loves the creativity in and of itself, or some combination of the two?
You know, this whole time, the series is asking, you know, what is the most important thing to Peggy? And the answer is obvious. It's doing the work itself. Like, she blows off the dinner with the boyfriend who doesn't really know her. She's definitely blowing off her family because they clearly are not the people who know her either. And the person that she does side with, we have two options here. We have Duck and we have Don. And Don is the one who really seems to understand her tenacity and her drive and what it is that she's doing creatively, even though he's, you know, seemingly shitting all over the things that she's presenting to him. It's very clear that he thinks she can do better, even if he's being kind of cruel. But Duck just kind of sees her as this, you know, romantic fulfillment machine. And he's not really thinking about whether or not she's actually good at what she's doing. He just wants to be able to sway her away from Don.
Right. I love that consistent undercurrent throughout this whole episode, which is that Don and Peggy do feel so isolated because they feel like people around them and people in their lives don't really see them for how they truly are.
Right.
And they come to realize they are one of the few, if not only people in each other's lives who see each other, for better or worse.
Right.
So when everyone else leaves to go to the fight and only the two of them remain, they instantly start trading barbs with each other. And really quickly, to speak to the boxing motif, start hitting below the belt.
Yeah, like real jabs, real intense jabs.
Because they know what is going to get the other person's goat.
Exactly.
Peggy says very nakedly, well, it's not my fault that you have no place to be and there's no one else in your life.
I feel like
huge ouch.
Yeah, I feel like she even gets close to just being like, you're an alcoholic. Like, I feel like she kind of goes there a little bit. But yeah, she's like, it's not my fault that you're having a midlife crisis and you have no family to go home to. And I mean, I don't think she knew how deeply that cut because as we know, Don Draper not only has gotten a divorce and his kids are with the wife, but you know, his whole past as Dick Whitman was kind of this rootless young person who had no real family that wanted him. Like, she had no idea that was the thing that she was actually hitting when she said that.
And I love that after 3 seasons of being this dutiful mentee, she lays out all of her grievances. Yeah. And we get this iconic line where she says, well, you never say thank you. And he says, well, that's what the money is for. That at the end of the day, this is still a professional relationship. And he is reminding her of those terms.
But also, weirdly, he's kind of just continuing to remind her of her place. Like, that is the whole thrust of that speech, right? He said, you should not only be thanking Jesus in the morning, but you should also be thanking me every day. And I'm like, whoa, Don, whoa. He basically said you should be grateful. And it's interesting that there are the other person who says that to her, you should be grateful, is her mother over the phone, who's like, you should be grateful that this nice boy is trying to make an impression on your family and invite you to dinner and do something nice for you. There aren't a lot of nice boys trying to do that for you.
I didn't even catch that. Yeah, that's good.
Yeah, so it's just there's a whole day of people telling Peggy what she should be grateful for and, putting her in her place, reminding her, there was, interestingly enough, that tiny cameo of not Megan Draper yet. She's going to eventually become Megan Draper. But she's just kind of like, oh, how old are you turning? And, Peggy's like, I'm going to be 26. And she's like, you know what? You're really, you're doing it. You're getting where you want to go. I can't remember the exact phrase she says, but, it's really sweet that Megan is basically kind of like, you go, girl. You're doing great. You've got a date with a dude tonight. You're doing really well in your job. And then, she leaves. And here comes Pete's wife, Trudy, who's like heavily pregnant. And, by the end of the conversation is basically like, you do know that 26 is still very young. Like, you still have time, sweetie.
It's just dripping with condescension.
Good Lord. And then, of course, they both come out of the bathroom and there's Pete like sweating, which I thought was so funny. But anyway.
To me, that scene in the bathroom really encompasses a lot of what Mad Men covered in terms of the rise of the woman in the workplace, like that whole thematic arc that plays throughout the entire series. I love that Peggy is caught between Megan's awe. We don't know a lot about Megan at this point, but she turns out to be this modern cosmopolitan woman who is the farthest thing from the Betty Draper housewife archetype that we can get. Right. She is in absolute awe of Peggy. Yeah. On the other hand, we have Trudy. Like, Trudy is living her best life by having that baby in her belly.
Correct. And then there's a part of me that just feels like Trudy knows. I think Trudy without knowing, I think Trudy knows something happened.
That's an interesting spin.
I do.
She could just smell it on Peggy.
That's how I feel.
Something untoward
I think she
happened
can,
here.
yeah.
Interesting. Well, so there's, just like everything in Mad Men, there are many, many layers to that interaction. I saw it as more surface level, just that Trudy is very traditional, and she had those old-fashioned goals of raising a family and having a successful husband, and she's absolutely nailing those goals. And so she very much looks down on Peggy in that moment. And so we have this identity crisis, at least in that moment with Peggy, where I think that it's very relatable from like a 26-year-old professional point of view, which is you can look at your life in one way and you're fucking killing it. And you can look at your life in another way and say, wow, like, has that ship sailed? Am I too late? Is 26 young or old?
Right. And it's interesting because, it comes back to echo a little bit where Don is basically like, you're 20-something now. It's too late, or you need to get over birthdays. You shouldn't be in this space of wanting to have a birthday anymore. And it's just like, ouch, Don. Like, what the hell? Is she a kid or is she too old? Make up your mind, dude. There's a lot of parallels in this episode. There are a lot of tiny, interesting decisions that Peggy is making throughout this episode that are shown so matter-of-factly, they just run right by you. Shortly after Peggy has made the decision, one of the many times she makes a decision that she is going to leave the office, Don has called her back into his office, and Peggy makes a decision not to take off her coat. She goes to start to do it and then decides, no, I'm putting my foot down. I am keeping my coat on. There was something really interesting and significant to me about that. It felt like a little act of rebellion, because normally I would assume that she would just, take off her coat and think, oh God, I'm in it for the long haul with Don. And she does say in several points, you win again. You've gotten the demand of my time. You're taking me away. And I think this is probably a good point to talk about what the lures are outside of the bottle, because in this case, the bottle is Sterling Cooper Draper Price. For Dawn, there's the dinner and fight. And then for Peggy, it's her birthday party, which she assumed was going to be a romantic evening, just her and her boyfriend. And it turns out that this boyfriend has invited her mom, her sister, brother-in-law, and roommate to dinner as well, which is not something
nightmare
Peggy
scenario
wanted.
for Peggy Olsen.
The last thing she wants. Like, he could not have gotten further away from the thing that she wanted.
Right.
But yeah,
another instance of, wow, this person doesn't know me at all. This person doesn't see me at all.
And then, of course, he just makes that decision that when he decides that she's not going to fulfill her dutiful role and come running to him because, you know, she's with Dawn again, air quotes around that, he makes a decision that he's going to stay with her family. And she's just like, oh, so you are literally siding with the people who know me the least. You are literally putting yourself in that position. So we're done, my guy. It's over. It was just really interesting. And then, of course, you know, there's always that push-pull, that call back and forth. She literally is placing calls to the outside world and realizing more and more that her place is within the office. And when they do leave the bottle, because they go to a Greek restaurant for her birthday dinner.
She gets a birthday dinner in the end, yes.
She does get a birthday dinner, and she gets it with her real family, weirdly enough. She gets it with her real family. She gets it with Dawn.
What do you think Don meant when he said, there's a way out of this room that we don't know about?
Oh, man. Ooh. I thought about this for a long time because it was just so interesting to hear. I felt he was talking about the work. I felt he was talking about the way that he's trying to escape Anna's death. And I feel like he's talking about coming out the other side. I feel like these are two people who are very good at running away at things, Peggy and Don, running away from the things that aren't important to them or are too important to them. And I feel like he saw that mouse and he thought, man, this mouse is escaping. this mouse is escaping from everything, which is something I would like to do. And what I found really interesting about that whole circumstance was the way in which he talks about the mouse. He says, you know, I grew up on a farm. Like, he starts to slowly just drop these little details about his life without thinking about it. And it feels like it kind of started with that mouse.
Right. He doesn't reveal these details like it's some big scandalous secret. Oh, Dick Whitman. Oh, I took somebody else's name. I deserted the war. I like that he reveals these details without any fanfare.
And there's no
baggage there. Right. There's no shame.
There's no shame attached to it. And that's the thing that is so weird and refreshing and honest about these conversations. There's no shame in him saying, I grew up on a farm. It's just a simple statement. And of course, this is coming after, I think, the catharsis of telling Betty, right? I mean, it imploded his marriage with Betty when he came around to the truth finally, right? And so here he is now. He can say it again. And because the worst has happened. He's lost his family. He's lost his marriage. He lost, you know, that shining beacon on the hill. And now he can just say it. But I don't think he could say it as easily to anyone else as he can to Peggy. So that was really interesting to me. What did you think about what he was trying to say? We can get out of this room.
I always interpret it in a very dark way. For some weird reason, this sounds like a long shot. I think he's referring to suicide. Certainly there are suicidal themes that play throughout. I do think that he's in a very dark place in this episode.
Yeah.
And he's certainly drunk. And I think that suicide is always kind of on Don Draper's mind, well into even the series finale. On the other hand, I think that he is also in some metaphysical way talking about the work. So it's either like this path of light or this path of dark. And I do think that is a tension that plays throughout the entire series and throughout Don Draper's arc. But for some reason, just, I don't know whether it's like the shadows on his face, like the framing, everything is coalescing in that moment. That it just always makes me think, oh my God, I think he's talking about something that I'd rather have him not talking about. I mean, right down to like the imagery that's baked into the opening titles.
Right. Yeah.
You
just
know,
dropping
I think that's
off the
where,
side of the building. Yeah.
Right. There's a way out of this room that we don't know about.
Right.
For example, the window.
I mean, man.
And then on a less dark note, I think that line also applies to Peggy and her career trajectory, some of which we've already covered. But earlier we get that restroom scene with Megan and Trudy. And at the time, to be a woman in New York in 1965, those were sort of like your two choices, right? Your two paths. Right. And later on, when she's dragging Don in to help him because he's a drunk wreck, she chooses between the ladies' restroom and the men's restroom, and she goes into the men's restroom. And I love that. So on a less dark note, that also is a way that this line reverberates throughout the episode. There's a way out of this room that we don't know about, this room being the choices that women face.
Exactly.
Well, how about the choices that men have at their disposal? So I like that. I like that in terms of like what that meant for Don versus what that meant for Peggy.
Yeah, well, I did, just to go back to that restroom moment, I was really fascinated by that quick choice that she makes or has to make, because she is choosing to enter into the same space as Don. She's choosing the men's room. She is choosing to step into the discomfort of being in that room with him. Mm-hmm. And just that he, you know, and again, down to choices, they have the urinals and she's just like, oh God. So she's really in a space where she knows she is definitely not supposed to be. But isn't that just how the whole of her career has been going? She's in a space where she is not supposed to be. You know, this is where I really see the nature of their relationship dramatically changing, right? She is acting as companion, as friend, as nursemaid, essentially. She also kind of acts a little bit like mom when the two boys start to get into the scrap, right? Don and Duck, when they start fighting with each other. And there was just something in that fight that I thought was really interesting. It's so funny. They've just come back from having this conversation where Peggy is kind of like, you never were interested in sleeping with me. And not that I necessarily wanted you to sleep with me, but I do feel a little bit hurt that I wasn't even a consideration. Meanwhile, in the middle of this fight, you realize Don will go to the mat for her. Right. He will. He will throw a punch in her honor. And she literally has two men fighting over her. One who, like, really genuinely cares about her, and the other one who thinks of her as, like, a young, fun sex object who's going to fulfill his own desires and needs. So it was just really interesting.
To go back to when they finally have it out, Don and Peggy, that is, when they're sitting at the bar and they bring up this question of why Don never tried to make advances on Peggy. Was that a question that always weighed on your mind, or was that something that you wanted addressed in some way?
To be honest, no. It never weighed on my mind. I did not ever think that Don and Peggy were going to get together. I never felt that there was anything romantic between them. Mm-hmm. I think for me, I'm not sure if it was I believe it was the pilot episode where he rejects her first. I think it was transparent to the audience that she was doing it because she thought it was expected of her, or that was the way she thought she had to get ahead. So I guess from my perspective, I never thought that Don was ever considering her as a romantic option, and not in a dismissive way, but in that he saw something different about her.
Yeah, I agree. I am glad that they talked about it.
Me too.
Because I think it really clarified that their intimacy transcended that of a sexual nature.
Yes.
And so it was refreshing to hear them sort of lay it on its face. At the same time, I feel like they always saddle Peggy with this notion that she's the anti-Joan, or that she's not a sex pot, or that I think that is so overplayed.
Right. It's kind of ridiculous because Elizabeth Moss is like really beautiful.
She's like, cute.
Like, she's a lovely looking woman. Like, I don't know why. They're like, she's just not attractive. And Don is like, but you are, though. Like, he's like, that's not the problem here.
That said, they definitely made her more cute as, like, the seasons went on.
Oh,
and I think that did reflect, like, her arc. The more she built her career, the more she could afford hair and makeup and attention to grooming.
Right, but also she could come into her own a little bit more. Like the higher her confidence was, the more, isn't that generally the case? The more attractive you become, the more your confidence soars. And the television version of that is we expand your hair and makeup budget. Like, I feel like she just became more and more confident and more herself. And then I think too, she definitely, especially starting with this episode, became even more of a main character than she already was.
Agree. I think that this is the episode where she stops being Don Draper's mentee. She almost, this is like a graduation for her.
Yeah, they become definitely a lot more on an equal playing field.
100% equals, I think so.
We can talk about the Anna of it all floating around in the background.
I wanted to bring that up
there,
for sure.
But
Yes. Thoughts on Anna Draper?
Yeah. Oh, God. I remember my feelings the first time I watched this episode. I was devastated that Anna was dying. And I wasn't mad at the show for doing the transparent ghost thing. I thought, you know what? It could be that he's just dreaming this, because it felt like an amalgamation of the fact that they've been talking about Samsonite all night. She's carrying the Samsonite luggage. She comes in and she looks at him, and it doesn't seem like she's, looking at him sad or anything like that. She's actually kind of smiling at him and saying goodbye, and then she just kind of disappears into the ether. Meanwhile, his head is on Peggy's lap. Like, Peggy has become the Anna surrogate now. This is the person who knows him better than anyone else. It's Peggy. Mm-hmm. And then at the end of that episode, after they've had this conversation where Peggy has literally said, I don't know the difference. I'm starting to feel like I don't know the difference between something that's good or awful. And here comes Don with this, again, sports-themed Samsonite pitch that, is a take on the fight that happened that night between Clay and Liston. To me, just to be, really real, I didn't think it was that great. I did not think that
His
pitch
final
was
idea.
a good one. I didn't like it. And I felt like Peggy is doing the whole, they're there, dear kind of thing, where she's like, you know what? It's gonna be okay. And I felt like part of that hand-holding was, we're in a place now where we can really recognize what the other is going through. We can really see each other.
Yes to all of the above. To back up a little bit, just to touch briefly on Anna Draper, I went back and watched some of the Anna episodes.
Awesome.
Where she initially tracks him down because he's the guy who stole her dead husband's name.
Yeah.
And then they sort of improbably end up becoming friends. We don't get to know a lot about Anna as a person.
Right.
I think that Don gravitates towards her because she is the only one who knows his true identity. There doesn't seem to be anything about her that is inherently attractive to Don except for that fact. Does that make sense?
No, that does make sense.
That she is the keeper of his secret is what makes her attracted to him as a friend. There doesn't seem to be anything else other than she has a really calming and friendly demeanor. So I think that he just needs that person in his life. And when Anna dies, then it becomes Peggy. There is just something a little clinical about that setup.
This was the first time that someone had heard that secret and did not reject him. That's kind of where it came from for me. He was not rejected because of his past, right? What is it? Matt Weiner said that the show, the whole crux of the show is really about what it means to become a wasp.
A wasp?
What does it mean to immerse yourself into that world? How do you essentially become a person who passes into that existence?
The world of the insiders.
The world of the insiders, but I do definitely mean pass. I do mean pass in the same way that, African Americans have been accused of passing if they are of light complexion, right? I do feel like she is the one, Anna Draper is the one who knew that Don Draper is Dick Whitman, A. B, she had every right to, hate him, disavow him, expose him, let the world know exactly what kind of person he is, right? But she didn't do that. I think she saw that he was trying to quote unquote make it or trying to overcome something, and allowed him the space to do that and merge those two identities. She's the only person where he could be his old self, exist as his old self, but also hold on to that identity, that dream of being
right,
the madman, the ad man,
right,
the good guy,
right.
you know, the person
Yes.
who, you know, has it all. Like, she was the only person who allowed him to be those two halves together.
Right. She holds both truths, both identities at once. Yeah, I think I'm just getting greedy as a viewer at this point, but maybe I just wanted a little more as to where that generosity and understanding came from.
That's a good point.
And this is not necessarily even a critique on the writing. It's
Yeah.
more just, I want to know more because it impacts my understanding of Dawn.
Right.
But what is it about her as a person?
That allowed for that.
That's all.
Gotcha. No, that's a really good point. You're right. I don't think that they ever show us exactly what her motivations are and how she arrives at that place of, it's okay. It's going to be okay. I'm here for you. Yeah, I don't know. They don't ever really show us that, I don't think.
I guess, do you want to talk a little bit about this boxing motif? I'm going to be a little bit out of my depth just because I'm not really a boxing history fan. But obviously, you know, there's a strong, like, fighter versus fighter motif. And I just wanted to know if you had any thoughts on that.
I thought it was really interesting, the whole, well, first of all, we think of Muhammad Ali. We think of a person who has chosen his own identity as well, right? He was Cassius Clay, and then he went on to become Muhammad Ali of his own choosing. And so I guess that in some way kind of reflects Dawn, which is interesting because Dawn is on the side of Liston, who he says, you know, is methodical, and he just goes about his work and he gets it done. And it's kind of like, but Dawn, you're not like that.
That is good. I always wondered, like, what did it mean that he bet on the loser, that he bet on
Right.
Liston?
Yeah.
That's good.
He really thinks of himself as somebody, or really desperately hopes or wants to be somebody who is seen in that sort of stable, steady way, that dependable, not necessarily boring and dependable, but definitely somebody who doesn't stick his head out too far, you know, doesn't stick his neck out too far, isn't somebody that, you know, is unconventional, even though he really is. He desperately, I mean, it's built into his DNA that he is, that he would make this choice to be somebody and then stick to being that somebody, even though it is so disruptive to his own emotional well-being. So I don't know. I thought it was really interesting that he bets on the loser, that he's siding with this person because that's who he aspires to be, even though he is the more flashy and interesting Muhammad Ali.
Right. Fascinating.
Yeah.
I was distracted by this notion that he bet on the loser and he also rejected Peggy's Joe Namath idea.
Right.
And Joe
yes.
Namath did end up going on to endorse many products in the 70s.
Exactly,
so that's
yeah.
two bad calls. I'm certain that that's intentional on the writer's part. On
Yeah,
Matthew Weiner's part. That Don
would
is making
agree.
bad call after bad call. And for viewers like you, Courtney, that he makes a third bad call that even at the end, you were not won over by his Clay versus Liston inspired Samsonite ad. So maybe
I
are we
was just
watching?
so done with him at that point.
Right? I think that if this show boiled down to its most component parts, that this show is about the fall of Don Draper and the rise of Peggy Olson, that this episode would be a strong reflection of that.
Oh, yeah.
That Don is nowhere near this legendary, infallible ad man that they make him out to be, and it's actually
Correct.
Peggy who is more on the pulse of what's going on. That being said, I do think that celebrity endorsements are lazy, so I tend to agree with Don.
But this felt like his weird cheat around that, because that image is so iconic of Ollie knocking out Liston, right? Like everybody knows that image. So technically, he has found a way to quote unquote get an endorsement without using those actual people that were involved.
Right.
And that to me didn't feel ingenious. That felt like a cheat. And it also felt like, I mean, if you're going to chew out Peggy for that, like, come on, dude, it's not a better idea.
To Peggy's earlier point about Don just changing her ideas just enough so that they become his.
Absolutely.
She is almost his muse in a way. Not that he was coming up with shit ideas before she came along, but that she definitely has been doing the dirty work of getting the ball rolling, and then he gets to put the cherry on top, and then he gets the Clio.
Exactly. And I am so for the show taking him off of his pedestal. Like, I am so for that, because it's true. Like, he rolls in at the end with the beautiful pitch, but he didn't necessarily get to that work. Just like he rolled on up with Don Draper's name and backing without actually necessarily doing the work to get there. Like, you can kind of see this repeating motif of him just standing on the shoulders of someone else and getting to where he needs to go. Not necessarily to defame the fact that he does do good work. He is a very strong ad man, but it does seem like his strength is building on the foundation of others.
Agree. 1,000%. And I guess we would be totally remiss if we didn't absolutely put a pin in this and say this moment where he grasps Peggy's hand at the desk at the end is such a beautiful mirror image of when she grasped his hand in the pilot coming onto him and he rejected her. It is just such a satisfying visual reminder of how far these two characters have become separately and together.
It feels full circle, and it is so good that they were able to find a way to wrap that storyline a little bit and let us know, like, okay, this is the direction that we're going in now. This is the relationship that these two have. Whatever your concerns were about them romantically, it's done, it's settled. They are very clearly family to each other.
Any stray thoughts in your notes that we didn't get to?
I do also think it's really interesting that we do see two people that end up with these two characters in this episode. So we see Don's future wife, Megan. And again, he has to, at this point, I think he's kind of making a decision between Megan and Dr. Faye.
Correct.
If I'm not mistaken.
Yes.
And then, of course, eventually we see Peggy. We see Peggy has two paramours and then also the man that she ends up marrying or being with, which is crazy when you start to think that they actually end up getting together. And how they're interacting. And he's like not even a consideration. Like, he's not even on the game board at that point in the series. He's just somebody she works with.
Are we talking about Stan?
Stan, yeah.
Yeah, just to flash forward to the series finale, I think it is so right that they ended up together. And I never would have thought that at this point. I thought that he was just a blowhard. He was a jerk.
Right.
The episode before this is the episode where Peggy and Stan strip down to their knickers in the Waldorf hotel room. And that was Peggy sort of putting Stan in his place and her saying, like, you know, I have a right to be here. I'm good at my job. And I was just annoyed at that whole episode because I was like, she shouldn't even have to do that. She shouldn't have to prove herself to Stan. But what they go through, this, like,
they end up being like the boy and the girl next door who grew up together. And then eventually they're just kind of like, oh, yeah, no, this actually makes sense and works for us. And maybe we should get together. How weird.
It's so romantic comedy in the best way possible. Not to stray too far from the episode that we're talking about, but one thing that I really do love about the show is how it changes its tone ever so slightly and becomes lighter and lighter with each season.
Yeah, that's a good point.
For the most part, it's really brooding and dark in seasons 1 through 3. And then season 4, it's punchier. They feel more comfortable with comedy. And they also feel more comfortable with binary black and white sentiment. This is romantic. These two people are connecting in a way that shows that they are not above that comfort and familiarity. And I do think that part of it has to do with the show's unexpected fame and place in the zeitgeist. Once these characters became beloved, the writers were like, oh, maybe we should reward the viewers who come to the show purely for these character relationships. But then, at the risk of giving the writers too much godlike credit, I think that the tone also matches Don Draper's journey. He's always been this ad man, this creative who is comfortable with sentiment in his own work. And I think the more Don discovers these emotions and how okay they are to have, that it's okay to connect with people, it's okay to fall in love, then the show itself also follows suit.
Exactly right. And I thought it was really interesting in that episode specifically towards the end, first of all, that he's super, I think someone said, I can't remember which review it was that I read, but somebody said he Supermaned himself together. Like when she opens that door and he is perfectly coiffed the next morning and her hair is askew and she looks like she has just obviously spent the night in the office in her clothes. But Don, when she opens that door, he's utterly perfect. He's back to who he is. It was unbelievable, right? But then he doesn't deny the fact that what happened last night happened by taking her hand, by showing her his terrible pitch.
Courtney hates the pitch.
I hate the pitch, everybody. He makes it clear. Last night happened. Last night was real. We are peers, essentially. And as she's leaving the door, speaking of lines that have a lot of resonance, she asks, open or close? And he says, open.
Aww.
And that, for me, felt like something probably definitely on the nose, but it felt like, this is a shift. This is a shift for him.
Yeah.
Now, we didn't ever get into the technical aspects of about how this operates as a bottle episode.
Well, we must. Okay, what are your thoughts there?
I do wonder if this is a little bit more of a cheat in terms of technically how it is executed as a bottle. Granted, they do spend a lot of time in the offices of Sterling Cooper Draper Price, but most episodes spend a lot of time in Sterling Cooper Draper Price.
True. I almost wonder if we could even name 3 episodes that happen to take place entirely at the office. And so therefore, it's a bottle episode.
Exactly. But emotionally, they feel like they're in a bottle because it is the two of them, Don and Peggy, for so much of the episode.
Right.
So,
right, yes. And I would be kicking myself if I didn't mention one of my favorite shots in this episode comes right when the employees all leave to go to the fight. The lights go off.
Yep.
And Peggy, she sort of just looks around and sees the empty hallway. It's changed. It's like, we are entering the ring, as it were.
Exactly.
And so even just like a brief moment like that makes me think, I'm going to count this as a bottle. Just to your point about emotionally, it feels like a bottle episode. Do you want to rate it? How full does this make your bottle?
Oh, man. I'd give this a 99. Yeah. By virtue of the fact that the storytelling is so effective, it is wrapping up so much from the past, it is putting us on a really interesting journey for the future, and it just gives us so much for these two characters that we really, really care about. It's beautifully executed, as are basically the majority of the episodes of this series, but it is a standout. I think I said this was in my top 2. I think this might be my number 1 for the series.
Snap. Love it. Yes, I would be hard-pressed to disagree, which is to say I don't really at all. I would give it a 99% as well. It's a beautiful examination of both Don and Peggy, and as we mentioned, how similar they are, but also how different they are. She just doesn't have as much baggage as he does.
That's
There's
correct.
more hope for her. And so I think that this episode really succeeds as a thorough examination of these characters together, what they mean to each other, and how they function in each other's lives and how they change each other's lives for the better, as well as it really gives us a strong sense of where they're headed for the future, for better or worse. So
I agree. Phenomenal.
Well, this has been Bottle Episodes. If you have an idea for a bottle episode from television history we should cover, or if you're trapped in a single primary location and need to send a distress call, that line has suddenly become much too real. Email podcastbottleepisodes@gmail.com. That's podcastbottleepisodes@gmail.com. Stay healthy, everybody.
Wash your hands and don't touch your face.
That's you.
Oh, God.